Hello, everyone. My name is Lieutenant Commander Tiffany Funt. I'm a pharmacist with HHS on deployment to the Therapeutics arm of the federal response to COVID-19. I'd like to welcome everyone to the 7th session of our mini-series on monoclonal antibodies. We launched this series in December with a goal of creating a national platform for different providers to learn how to administer the monoclonals and come together to share best practices and learn the latest science. This series has featured healthcare professionals from a variety of elements of the U.S. healthcare system, including home infusion, federal partners, long-term care, community health centers, and large health systems. And it's been a really fun environment to learn from these different sectors. Today, we have an exciting lineup of presenters and panels that represent this variety and who will contribute their insights on 2 topics: overcoming challenges scaling the monoclonals and best practices for timely administration. With that, I'm going to hand it over to our co-moderator, Dr. Bruce Strumminger from Project ECHO.
Thank you, Tiffany, and welcome everyone. As Tiffany said, it's the 7th session in this mini-series on outpatient therapeutics. And I'm just going to be running through a few logistic items and helping introduce our first speaker. So we really welcome, we know you have a lot of questions. We want to try to answer as many of them as we can. So please put your questions and comments in the Q&A feature down along the bottom right of the Zoom toolbar. Also, if you have any technical or logistic issues, put those in the chat and we'll try to address those and help you out. We are recording today's session, as we always do, and your attendance is consent to be recorded, so thank you for joining us. Today's presentations will be made available to everyone. They should either have been connected through links to the email announcement that went out today. They'll also be on our website dedicated to this mini-series, and we'll be sharing a link to that in the chat. We'll also have a link to the recording within a few days on the website. So if you want to watch this again or share it with a colleague, you'll be able to do that. We are offering continuing medical education credits, as well as other continuing education through the University of New Mexico, where Project ECHO is based. There should be a link in today's email announcement to that, and we will share a link about 15 minutes before the end of the session in the chat. After completing a brief survey, and that's the part that we really appreciate because we need your feedback and want it to improve and plan for future sessions, and you'll get instant CME. Just as a reminder, these learning sessions are focused on improving patient care and health systems and supporting clinicians. Please, let's keep them apolitical and non-commercial. Thank you for that. And just a word about data use. The data you share with us when you register, when you answer the polling questions, etc. We take data stewardship very seriously and keep your individual data confidential. What we do share with HHS ASPR is all de-identified. So just briefly to go over the agenda for today's session, which is focused, as Tiffany said, on achieving speed and scale. We'll have a presentation by Corinna Manini, who is with Referral Health in New York, who will be talking about their experience in the FQHC setting, scaling up monoclonal antibody infusions. We'll have 5 minutes of Q&A after Corinna's presentation. We'll then have another local example, this one on scaling from colleagues in Utah at Intermountain Health. Brandon Webb will be presenting their experience. And then Dr. Christian Ramers, who is my co-moderator. Christian's an infectious disease specialist at Family Health Centers of San Diego and chief of population health. He'll be facilitating the second half of the session. And after these 2 examples, we'll have our panelists, experts, answering your questions in a group panelist discussion. So with that, it's my pleasure to pass the microphone over to Dr. Corinna Manini, who is the Chief Medical Officer at Referral Health. Corinna.
Thank you, Bruce. Okay, let me see if I can share my slides. just happened? I don't know why this isn't working. 1 second. I think I got it. Do you want to try then?
Do you want us to try and help out and
I
share?
think so.
We're
My
doing it.
Zoom window. Oh wait, let's see. No,
We've got them up, Karina. If you want to just say next slide, that would work.
perfect. You're on. Okay. You're on the title slide?
We are.
Okay. Thank you. 1 second. I'm wondering if we should go out of order. My Zoom just died. Would that be possible?
We're seeing you, Karina. Are you able to see what we're projecting?
I'm not sure what just happened.
Yeah, Bruce, let's go ahead and switch it up if we can. Brandon, sorry to throw this on you, but why don't we go a little bit out of order and have Brandon go first if you can go ahead and share your screen.
You bet. You able to see that?
We sure are. Let me, before you jump in, let me go ahead and introduce you. Brandon is the chair of the Intermountain Health COVID-19 Therapeutics Committee, where he's led or been part of more than a dozen COVID-19 clinical trials, and he's currently the director of the Intermountain COVID-19 Monoclonal Antibody Treatment Program. So thank you for being here, Brandon.
Thank you, Christian. Tiffany, Bruce, it's a pleasure. I'm going to talk briefly about our experience in scaling this process up in the Intermountain Healthcare Integrated Health System, which is an integrated healthcare network that serves a number of states in the Intermountain West, roughly 1.5 million patients a year, in a total patient basin of about 3.5 million. And the challenge as these new products came on board was several-fold, and I want to talk to some of those today. The first thing I wanted to highlight was some things that we've actually learned about how these work. And these become relevant as we talk about how to get the most bang for the buck in implementation. If you recall, both the Blaze 1 and the outpatient anti-spike studies both showed that in a broader recruitment population, the number needed to treat to prevent one hospitalization was around 20. But they also reported subgroup analyses that suggested that in a higher risk strata, the number needed to treat to prevent one hospitalization was about half that, in the 9 range. And in terms of getting the most bang for the investment, that becomes relevant, and I'll speak to that in a moment. As many of you are very well aware, there are some unique real-world challenges to delivering monoclonal antibodies. We recognize that they work best earlier on in the symptom course. And so one challenge is identifying patients as early as possible. Logistically, we also recognize that because these are intravenous infusions, they carry some although small risk of infusion reaction. They need to be delivered in settings where those infusion reactions may be managed appropriately. And not coincidentally, those same sites also serve a population comprised of oncology patients, autoimmune disorders, in whom immunocompromised status is common, and overlapping with contagious COVID patients is clearly not ideal. The other issue too has been that because of the need for monitoring after infusion, the infusion time does take, including the infusion time and monitoring, adds to the logistic challenges of delivering these. And then finally, we recognize that because of all of these logistics, our capacity to infuse oftentimes is much more limited than our drug supply, and usually far more limited than the number of eligible patients. And so one of the challenges is how do we match limited capacity to the patients who are at the highest risk and most likely to benefit? Here in Utah, that last challenge was addressed at the state level. The Utah State Crisis Standards of Care Committee has a scarce medication subgroup that previously worked to equitably and efficiently allocate remdesivir. That same committee was reconvened to discuss monoclonal antibodies and adopted a locally validated risk calculator that was able to accurately stratify patients in terms of their risk of becoming hospitalized or going on to suffer mortality. And that risk calculator was then adopted to match limited capacity to our ability to infuse. But it also opened the door for needing to identify patients who were in these higher risk strata. The rationale for doing that was actually to maximize these limited resources. And what we've learned is that if the goal is to reduce hospitalization, you can effectively get more bang for your buck with the resource investment if focused on a higher risk group of patients. And then as capacity increases, we've been able to expand eligibility criteria. This busy slide is a schematic of the process that we put into place in our integrated health system. We identify patients via two pathways. The first is via referral through a hotline or a dedicated email. These referrals can come from any healthcare provider, and we've worked with community health centers, emergency departments, and other community providers to make sure that that referral pathway is smooth. We're also identifying patients prospectively, proactively, from a positive test list that is generated every single day. Intermountain laboratories serve about 50% of all tests done within our region. And so with that, we're able to actively identify patients and connect them with treatment. That's done by verifying eligibility, and that's largely being accomplished by a provider group that we affectionately have called the MAB Squad. It's a group of providers that verify eligibility. They contact the patient. They have the risk-benefit conversation. They identify the local infusion site, make an appointment, write the orders, and document. And then after that, ensure that the patient has follow-up. In this, we have endeavored to achieve geographic equity by strategically placing infusion locations throughout the Intermountain West, such that the locations match the community case density and also provide access in terms of travel time. Right now, we have 8 infusion centers and 10 urgent care facilities who combined are serving the population in our healthcare system. We operate both infusion centers and urgent cares in a very similar way. They have adopted a standardized reaction protocol, and both the Regeneron and the Eli Lilly products are being used in these centers. I'll just finish with a brief summary of our experience to date. We've noticed that as the availability of these products and the awareness has increased, we're getting more referrals. Fortunately, there are fewer patients eligible as our case numbers have declined in the last several weeks, which we're very grateful for. And as you can see in the green, the number of patients who ultimately accept therapy has increased as a proportion of those that we are communicating with or screening. Just in terms of some real world experience, because of the proactive patient contact program, right now our median time from testing to infusion is just over 2 days. And we're feeling really good about that, efficiently connecting patients with care. As you can see, the patients being treated are certainly high risk, median age of 66 with an average number of 5 chronic medical conditions. And in that, with that context, these patients are in the 96th percentile on average for risk of being hospitalized. And we'd estimate that their hospitalization rate untreated is at least 15% or greater. By contrast, our actual 14-day hospitalization rate that we've observed so far is only 4%. And we've observed a roughly 1% rate of infusion reactions, none severe, about half of those hypersensitivity and about half vagal or infusion related. The summary then is that so far to date, we feel like we've been able to effectively and efficiently deploy these across a large geographic and population area. And the preliminary results that we're seeing absolutely supports what the clinical trials observed, that these do indeed appear to be effective in preventing hospitalization. Back to you, Christian.
Great, thank you, Brandon. We have a couple of minutes for questions, and actually some came in on the Q&A. The first from Rick Foster, loving the MAB squad reference. I can identify with that for my own health center, this has been very rewarding work for people, and they really love getting involved in it. The question is, how do you promote the referral process to practices and practitioners that are outside of Intermountain? Have you been able to bridge that gap yet?
Yeah, we've got a pathway for communicating with community affiliated primary care, and we've actually made a strong effort to do outreach there. We created some educational materials and have distributed those to try to really enhance that communication line.
Okay, great. And then another question from Sarah Weiselbu about the COVID risk allocation calculator. Have you incorporated this in for pregnant patients yet?
Because the EUA did not incorporate pregnant patients, neither did the risk calculator. So no on that one.
Okay. And then just a generic question. What is your advice to providers? I know we probably have some on the call that have not yet done this and are talking to their leadership about convincing them to do it. What's your advice about trying to convince leadership to administer monoclonals?
Yeah, I think that as we get more experience, we're more and more encouraged that this actually works, that it is a worthwhile investment. We recognize that it is an investment in resources, but we think that it's worthwhile, that an ounce of prevention on the front end is absolutely worth it in terms of reducing hospitalization and morbidity.
And then one final question for me. The data in this field has been evolving so rapidly, as you mentioned. How have you dealt with that? And have you had sort of separate data dissemination efforts to speak to providers specifically?
Yeah, that's been part of our approach to begin with. We recognize that we have to approach this as a learning healthcare system, and we want to contribute to our evolving understanding of these. And so we tried to enmesh learning and gathering data, but also to tie that into our ongoing education. And we've actually found that as we've shared those real world numbers, the low infusion reaction rates, the low rehospitalization rates, that's increased engagement, both provider and patient engagement.
I think we're a little ahead of time, so I'm going to sneak one more question in for you, Brandon. You mentioned that you're using both products, the bamlanivimab and then the Regeneron combination products. Are you differentially choosing which to use in which patient? And as we'll talk about in the panel, there's now a combination product from Lilly that's been given authorization later. So how are you approaching the two different products?
Very pragmatically, Christian. The bamlanivimab product is easier to prepare to reconstitute than is the Regeneron product. And because our urgent care sites are staffed by nurses who prepare, if a patient is closest to and the closest temporal availability for an appointment is in urgent care, they receive bamlanivimab. And if the closest infusion site to them with an available appointment is an infusion center where pharmacists are on staff, they receive Regeneron. But we don't see any clinical rationale for differentiating between the two. It's purely pragmatic.
At least at this point. I want to put a pin in that, and we'll get to the discussion from Graham Abra in the Q&A a little bit later. Thank you so much, Brandon. That was great. Karina, can I ask if you are back and able to share your screen?
I'm back. Thank
you,
everybody, for your patience. Okay, tell me do you see my slides now?
We sure do. You're good to go.
Okay.
Over to you.
Great. Perfect. Okay. I have nothing to disclose. So the goal of my talk today is to share our success in quickly standing up an outpatient COVID treatment program, really so that other FQHCs might be empowered and inspired to do the same. So there's such a tremendous need for this life-saving therapy, and medical home, outpatient facilities like ours present really a natural and effective setting for this program. In the next few minutes, I'll go over our health center's journey from the initial decision to get involved with COVID therapeutic infusions and how we stood it up in 10 days and then how we scaled it. Hopefully, I'll provide some insights on how others can achieve similar results. So this is a photo of Referral Health. We're headquartered in Rockland County, New York, and we're one of the largest FQHC systems in the US. The area we serve was one of New York State's high COVID activity red zones. And at the peak of the COVID outbreak in the spring of last year, there was so much suffering and isolation in the hospital that many of our patients just refused to go. And they begged us for an outpatient treatment option, but until now, we really had nothing to offer them. So the initial spark that got us involved was a session of this very ECHO mini-series that was about the SPEED program. So it was attended by our CEO, Connie Sternberg, who you'll meet later on in the panel. And this slide is basically just a screenshot of their website, but as you know, it's basically a program for direct distribution of the antibody to these 4 priority groups listed at the bottom. And the goal is to achieve equity and efficiency, and the SPEED team definitely delivers. So I put their email address in big, bold yellow here, in case you're not already in contact with them, write it down, covidtx@hhs.gov. I mean, they really make the process easy. I can't say enough about that. Okay, so this is our timeline. On December 30th, we emailed the SPEED team. We asked them, how do we get monoclonal antibody? And within an hour, I had a personal reply, not only answering that question, but preemptively answering a number of questions we hadn't even thought of yet, like how to identify eligible patients, how to administer the drug. We set an initial target to go live in 2 weeks, but we were actually able to beat that, and we infused our first patient 10 days later. So I wanted to share a few tips for a quick rollout. Number 1, identify a single expert or champion. This is a central point of contact in your org who assimilates all available info and serves as the resource for the rest of staff. So when IT is building an EMR smart form, or compliance is editing the consent form, they have a single person to go to. This same person should be in direct contact with senior leadership to allow quick decisions instead of questions going up a bureaucratic chain. And in our case, we identified a nurse practitioner who was working remotely for personal reasons. She was not an expert when this started, but she certainly is an expert now. So the second tip is view regulatory considerations as a to-do list, not as a list of obstacles. Yes, you should check with your state licensure authority to make sure that your current scope covers infusion services. But if not, many states have emergency tracks in place for COVID-related services, so it shouldn't be a huge lift. For the FQHCs listening, we worked with HRSA on the in-scope aspect, and our understanding of their position is that COVID-related treatments, including infusions, are considered part of the scope of FQHCs during the pandemic. And of course, give a heads up to your liability insurance provider that you plan to do this. Number 3, financial. So financially, it helps to consider this a pilot project and not a permanent programmatic change. Rolling this program out really didn't require monumental capital expenses, which surprised us. So if you don't have infusion pumps, you can actually hang the bag to gravity, or you don't have to buy those lazy boy recliners that you're imagining all infusion centers have. Patients can just sit in a regular chair. Each patient will have at least 2 billable visits, the infusion and then usually a follow-up visit, which can be done via telemedicine. But I would just say, don't ask, how can we afford to do this new program right now? Just ask, how can we afford not to do this right now? And once you start, you will find economies in your processes to control expenses. So to color in the picture a little bit more, here's some details of our setup. Prior to this, we did not have any formal infusion program. We didn't have infusion nurses. We occasionally infused saline, but we did that in the exam room. We really didn't have any large dedicated infusion space set up. And one of the concerns was infection control, because these are COVID positive patients early in their course. So they're actually in their most infectious period. And you'll have them sitting around for at least 2 hours for the infusion and the post-infusion monitoring. So to minimize exposure to other patients and staff, we infuse them each individually in an exam room with the door closed. And as you can see in this photo here, we just replaced the doors with glass. So the nurse could sit in an area across the hall and monitor 2 patients at a time with the door still closed. They do go in to take vitals, but they go with PPE and it's minimal exposure by comparison. Once we outgrew these 2 rooms, then we transitioned to a closed circuit camera as a way to monitor the patients without being in the same airspace as them. And a question we get a lot about is staffing. My advice is to cast a wide net to identify hidden skill sets among your staff and uncouple tasks. So the person who places the IV does not have to be the same person who takes the vitals, does not have to be the same person who does the post-infusion monitoring. In our case, we sent a blast email to all our clinical staff asking them, do you have any of these skills? Are you interested in being part of this program? And it was amazing. People came out of the woodwork so excited to finally be able to offer hope and the treatment that patients have been pleading for so long. So we heard from a nurse who works in our birthing center. We heard from one of our pediatric nurse practitioners who had done this kind of work in a prior life. This is a hopeful and energizing prospect for staff, and many want to be a part of it. So to boil it down, I will quote the French philosopher Voltaire. The perfect is the enemy of good. Do not wait until you have the perfect, most comprehensive business plan and every detail figured out on paper. Time is of the essence, just do it. You won't regret it. Okay, so shifting to scale a little bit. After we went live, we realized very quickly that our initial setup would not meet demand. Drug supply in this case is not rate limiting. And you know, in the vaccine era, it's like hard to even imagine, but you really, every time we asked for more drug from the speed team, we got it almost immediately. So access really became an operational question. And we had 2 goals in mind. Number 1, expand access so that any eligible person can get treatment. And number 2, health equity. How do you capture everyone who's eligible so that even the non-English speaking migrant worker, you know, who doesn't have their own cell phone can still get it? That's the kind of person who would get lost to follow up normally if you're doing kind of a back and forth telephone triage. So our strategy to achieve these 2 goals had 2 components. The first one built on our high throughput rapid COVID testing program. We test for COVID 7 days a week, most days 8 a.m. to after midnight. We've done 50,000 tests to date, and word has gotten out by now that we have we have almost 80 Abbott rapid testing machines. So we are just churning, testing. Patients are coming to us from all over New York State and even driving from other states to be able to get accurate same-day COVID test results in under an hour. So we already have a captive audience in our building at the precise time when therapy would be most effective. And we were like, we got to take advantage of this. So the second thing is to leverage technology, which I'll talk more about in the subsequent slides. So this is what our, there's a graphic of what our COVID testing workflow looks like. And what we did is to scale up is really rearrange the order of the steps. So when a patient above age 12 checks in to get tested, they're handed an iPad with a few screening questions for monoclonal antibody eligibility. And then, well, I'll talk more about the eligibility questions, but basically then the test is administered. And if both the screen and the test are positive, then the patient's infused. Our goal is basically door to chair in under an hour. And if either one of those is negative, they're not eligible, or they test negative, then they're just given instructions and sent home. So this is just a little more info on the iPad. These are the basic questions patients could see after they enter their phone number and date of birth. And we've built artificial intelligence on this iPad. So based on the date of birth you entered, certain set of questions will show up. If you're over 65, obviously you don't have the same questions as if you're 17. And then when someone does meet eligibility criteria, it kind of shows up on the iPad for the patient, but the information goes to 2 places. So the first place that the positive screen information goes to is this dashboard. So what you're looking at here is a photo of the TV screen that's on the wall of the infusion nurse's office. So this is where she also watches that closed circuit camera I was mentioning. So every time a patient screens as eligible for treatment on that iPad, an alert with patient identifiers pops up here. You can see that, and it gives the infusion nurse a heads up that there might be a patient coming. The lab test also populates here, and you can see in the right-hand column, and it's in real time. So she knows if the test has been done and is pending, and she knows if the result came back positive. Once it's negative, they fall off of this screen. So the second place that, I was saying the iPad information goes to two places. The second place it goes is directly into the HPI of the patient progress note in our EMR. So if the test is positive, the clinician sees it immediately, then confirms the history, symptoms, eligibility right there in the room with the patient before they leave. And then the provider right then and there can explain treatment, answer questions, they consent the patient, and then they order the drug. So this is pretty quick because we've built templates and smart forms, and they basically just prompt the provider. So we make sure we have a standardized, uniform, and consistent process. So I do want to, again, give credit to this whole concept of sending to two places to set two wheels in motion is like a page out of the Warp Speed playbook, right? So you do things in parallel rather than in series to achieve better efficiency. And we found that this has made a really big difference. At the very beginning, we were kind of waiting to get the positive result, telling the patient the positive result, and then wanting to screen them for eligibility. So kind of turning this around has really made a difference. This is my last slide here. I will end with a quote and a picture from Nakama P. This is one of our first patients we infused. She says, "I can't believe the process was so smooth and easy. The course of my COVID illness was remarkably less than what others without the treatment experienced. I had no fever, never had a thought of going to the hospital, and never entered the danger zone." So yes, the danger zone is severe disease and mortality from acute COVID infection, but we're also starting to think about there's a likely reduction of long COVID symptoms as well. And we've been in discussions with the CDC and New York State on this. Clearly more research is needed, but it will be very interesting to see how this pans out. So in summary, we at Referral Health are extremely proud to be able to bring this monoclonal antibody program to our patients. It's really been inspirational to patients, but also to staff and just the community in general. Even as vaccine rollout ramps up, we think there will be a continued need for this life-saving treatment, especially for the highest risk patients, at least for the foreseeable future. It's empowering for us to know there's some hope we can offer our most vulnerable. And I can stop sharing and take questions.
Karina, thank you for that fantastic presentation, for your enthusiasm and both on the practical side of really sharing how you all have been able to scale up your program and clearly meeting a lot of needs in your community. I've got one question before we're going to end up going to the panel. Could you give a little more detail about how you've used artificial intelligence and any other technologies to help you support the program?
Sure. So we have a data warehouse. That's basically where all data sources, like all our platforms, feed information into this data warehouse. For those who aren't used to what that is, if you think about what an actual warehouse is, you have all different vendors, all different products, and they all are in your warehouse on shelves. And so if you said, how many masks do we have? You could answer that even if you bought them from 10 different vendors. So basically the iPad, it's just like a jot form. I don't know if people are familiar. It's like a Google form. It's very easy. You can enter data on the iPad and it's HIPAA compliant. It will put the data that is entered into basically what looks like an Excel sheet in the data warehouse. And because we also have information from our EMR in the data warehouse, we're able to match it and match it. It's basically, they put in their date of birth and their phone number, and it matches that as a unique identifier to the patient. And so it's been amazing. I will say, if you don't have a data warehouse, I mean, you will in your future, because we're all kind of so data reliant. But if you don't, you really could do this on paper. Okay, it's a little more efficient. It's been, it makes it easier for everyone. But I think a lot of the concepts do not have to be so technologically complex. And I can make a job form, and I'm an internist, so it's really not that hard. So yeah, I'm happy. And by the way, my email is in there. I'm happy to answer questions individually if anybody wants to reach out to me on that point.
Great. Well, the solution of working in parallel rather than sequential, I think that's a key for everybody. With that, I'm gonna, thanks Karina, hand it back to Christian for our polling question and the panelist discussion.
Thanks, Bruce, and thank you, Karina. When you said that you learned about this from a mini hack series, it made my heart melt a little bit. So it's really great to see your story. Let's go to the polling question. Amanda, if we could bring it up. This is something we've been doing every week just to check the pulse of the audience here. The question is, has your healthcare facility or system infused patients with COVID-19 monoclonals? And you've got some options. Yes, you have. No, you have not. Or no, you're planning to. Or you don't know or not applicable. And I will give you 10 more seconds. We'd like to get at least 50% responses. So please keep them coming. And then as soon as we pull that down, I'm going to introduce our panel, and we've got lots to talk about. All right, we're above 50%. I think we can end the poll. So 45% yes, and then 15% no, and a smattering there. 10% of you are planning to very soon. So you're in the right place to learn. Great. Okay, so I'm happy to introduce our panel here. Some of those you've already met, so I'm not going to reintroduce them. We're going to invite Hani Sternberg, also from Referral Health, which is a multifaceted federally qualified health center. Hani is overseeing the mobilization of Referral's resources to adapt to the ever-changing environment to ensure that patients in the community have affordable and convenient access to testing and treatment information. Thanks for joining us. Mary Dietrich is the Executive Vice President and Chief Medical Officer of U.S. Renal Care, based in Plano, Texas. She's a practicing nephrologist and co-founder of Boise Kidney and Hypertension Institute, and has taken part in some research trials at U.S. Renal Care, as well as Boise Kidney, and served as the chairman of the Medical Advisory Board for Liberty Dialysis. Welcome, Mary. I have some dialysis questions for you. Justin Witzel is a pharmacist and the director of Delta Medical Infusion in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Justin is the pharmacy director. Under his leadership, Delta Medical Infusion has successfully provided over 30 doses of bamlanivimab to long-term care facilities in the state of Arkansas, an environment that we've talked about in this forum frequently. And then Gina Smith is the team commander of the Massachusetts 2 Disaster Medical Assistance Team and clinical member of the COVID-19 Therapeutics Allocation and Distribution Team in Boston. Gina is a board-certified healthcare emergency management and disaster response professional with extensive emergency management and preparedness expertise, and serves as a clinical advisor at the federal level, and also has field experience that I'm going to ask you about too, Gina. So welcome. And then we have some lurkers as well. I want to invite John Redd, who's the CMO of the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response at ASPR. Also on the panel, we have Rick Hunt, who's a senior medical advisor, also for HHS ASPR. And I thought I saw one more, but she's not here. Sandy Schneider may duck in as well, who's a representative of the American College of Emergency Physicians. Okay, so the first question is going to be to you, John. And we've got a couple of comments here about the breaking news. This audience is a real savvy one. And of course, everybody already knows that there's been an EUA given to the Lilly product combination with bamlanivimab and etesevimab. We've questions already. What's the clinical difference between the mono product and the combo product? And then when will the new combo product be available?
Hi, everybody. It's John Redd, the ASPR Chief Medical Officer. Very nice to be back. And first, I want to compliment the first two speakers. It was great to hear about a speed program and to hear again about all the work Intermountain's doing. But in regards to the new EUA, I'll say a couple things. The easier thing to answer is when will the product be available? And the availability of the combination product, so combo bamlanivimab and etesevimab, the answer is not immediately. So frankly, this is not it's been authorized, but we don't even know. Actually, I just checked during this Zoom, I emailed and to see about when real world it's going to hit the streets, and it is not immediate. And Gina Smith, my colleague from the team, may know more about that, but that's the impression that I have. So this is more of a coming available product than an immediately available product. So that's the first practical answer. But the bigger question really is how the combination products might fit in, and I'll say a few things because it's a somewhat complicated answer. The most important answer is that the combination product has been approved based on authorized based on the fact that it may be less likely to lead to emergence of escape variants. But bear in mind that that's in the individual person. So there's a difference between the process may be the same in terms of viral evolution when the virus replicates and has random changes in the RNA sequence. The process may be the same on a population level, but when an individual person who is already infected is getting a product, the issue is treating escape variants that happen in that person's body. So the reason why that's important is if you look at the effectiveness of bamlanivimab and the Regeneron product, casirivimab and imdevimab, it's essentially the same. So we've already had an ongoing comparison in real world between monotherapy bamlanivimab and combination therapy Regeneron. In the studies that led to the emergency use authorization, the combination product was not compared to bamlanivimab alone, it was compared to placebo. And in those studies, the risk reduction for the combined outcome was around the same as we've seen before, which is around 70% risk reduction. So, and I realize that's a somewhat wordy explanation, but the bottom line is still that the most effective therapy to get into the patient is the one that you can get in most quickly. And that has been the same since the very early days. We think that both mono bamlanivimab and the combination therapy are safe and effective now. And we have to keep our minds open and keep tracking the emergence of any variants. Thanks. I'll stop there, Christian.
Thank you, John. I think we are going to have to devote a future session to variants rather than try to tackle it right here. I want to get to some other diversity of kind of implementation questions. And Hani, I want to bring you into the discussion here. As a CEO, you have a unique perspective here of trying to manage your local resources. So how did you think about monoclonals in terms of managing competing priorities like testing and vaccine administration?
I think part of the challenge mid-December was we were already many months into this pandemic, and the fatigue, the burnout, the morale, it was the worst I've seen it in my career. And mid-December, when I joined the series where the FQHC in South LA was presented, it was the first glimmer of hope. And so in rolling this out, it was, of course, the intention to prevent further complications, but the unintended benefit was we really did rally the troops. And that's why we put so much effort into this. And I'm so pleased at the results, both on an individual basis and also in terms of the corporate culture. It has been really fantastic to see all of us energized, to see there is a glimmer of hope. This is not just despair and pain and death, but it's a game changer, as one of the patients told me.
Great, thank you for that. A question to you, Mary, that actually came in the chat about specifically using the products in dialysis patients. What is known, this is from Chantal Daifi, what is known about antibody and whether it gets stuck to dialysis membranes or is cleared by dialysis?
Yeah, so thanks for inviting me and giving us an opportunity to highlight our experience in this. So it should be no surprise to anyone that's listened on these calls that dialysis patients are sort of optimally positioned, both as recipients of it, but the conditions around which they treat facilitate the administration. So our patients are very high risk by any definition. And we know from national data that if you are a patient on dialysis and you contract COVID, and about 15% of dialysis patients around the country have, you have an over 50% chance of being hospitalized and about a 20% mortality, in some series much higher than that. So, high risk patients with very high risk of adverse complications and death. And situationally, they're at risk for COVID. They cohort, they're obligate congregates, they transit through the community. So lots of reasons why this would be a great place to use the antibody. And as you've heard about logistical barriers to administering the antibody, dialysis units often don't have those. We have a captive population where our patients come into our facilities for an average of 4 hours, 3 times a week. So we have a lot of contact with them. We have staff trained in infusions. We have vascular access. We have pumps. We have emergency meds and training for that. So really an optimal situation. Early, and we were an early adopter for all those reasons. I just couldn't wait to get my hands on this drug to offer something to these patients with the grim outcomes that I described. So in answer to your question, that's the question on everybody's mind. And there has been no definitive study of which I'm aware, and I've talked to the scientist at Lilly, about adherence to the dialysis membrane. This is a big molecule, 150 kilodaltons, and we know it's not cleared by dialysis. We have a lot of confidence. But this question comes up as, does it adhere to the membrane? And no one knows. You know, there's one old study of Rituxan that it didn't look like it was meaningfully adherent, meaning, you know, levels didn't go down. So we don't know the answer to that question. And early on, we were giving it post-dialysis in our cohort facilities. And that was really logistically challenging because they're already there for 4 hours. They're in a cohort facility, which is often end of day. And then they were staying an additional 2 hours, and it impacted adoption. So we, along with, you know, there's been intense collaboration in our industry around this effort, and we're giving it on dialysis. And, you know, we've approached Lilly about doing some studies on this. Lily's busy. And so I don't think we know the answer to that question, but my email's here. I'm happy to share any additional experience with the crowd. Thank you for letting me be a panelist.
Sure, Mary, just a very brief follow-up question. You described dialysis patients as obligate congregants, which brings to me infection control as a major issue here. What have you done as a strategy to make sure that people aren't infecting each other?
Yeah, so we as an industry committed to treating our patients in our facilities. So we've been treating COVID positive patients on isolated shifts or in isolation rooms since the beginning of the pandemic. So we're well versed in the management, and in every community where we deliver dialysis, we have the ability to cohort these patients and treat them safely.
Okay. I want to turn to Justin and Gina for some kind of good news. Both of you have been hard at work in the field in kind of different environments, but if you could just describe, Justin, a little bit of your success and what you think's contributed to your success, and then I'll go to Gina.
Sure. So we are part of the collaboration between HHS and the National Home Infusion Association to provide the medication to long-term care facilities, skilled nursing facilities, assisted living facilities, basically anything outside the hospital to provide that therapy so they don't have to go into the hospital. We want to save those spots for the people that actually have to go. So as part of that collaboration, we've been able to provide that medication to these facilities and treat these patients there have been large outbreaks, and we want to try to minimize that, of course. All of mine have been in the state of Arkansas, and it's been more of a rural effort because the whole state of Arkansas is fairly rural anyway. But we've had pretty good success with some of these locations that have had the multiple people needing it. We're still working on it in a lot of other facilities. It's kind of hard to get through sometimes to these and really push it, but so far, the patients who've received it have had little to no reactions. And like I said, we just had really good success with doing that. We try to use that as we push into other areas.
Great. And Gina, could you describe some of the work you've done in the field?
Sure. Thanks for having me here. I originally started working with the team with Dr. Red back in September or October, and it was all about gathering information, working with the allocation and distribution. And we got to the point where we started to focus on administration. How can we roll this out? How can we get more individuals to understand it and to use it at a time when everybody was stretched to the limits? We had the opportunity through NDMS, the National Disaster Medical System, and I had the opportunity with a team of 9 of my peers who have done disaster response, who have their day jobs, but leave it to do initiatives outside of their day-to-day work. We worked with El Centro Hospital in California, and we utilized an alternate site for the infusions, not your traditional infusion site. We did do it in the parking lot of the medical center, but pretty much remained independent so that we weren't putting a burden on the medical center that was already inundated with large numbers of COVID patients, emergency patients that were positive for COVID, and actually had inpatients outside in other tentage as well. So it was very challenging for them. They were receptive and happy to have us on board. We established an 8-bed infusion site. It was cohorted, so everyone was in the same, it was a large dome tent. Everyone was in the same tent being treated. Our personal protective equipment was minimized because we were all in there and not coming in and out. Our goal at the very beginning was to get this process up and running, but to remember to keep it really lean so that when our time was done, we could step back, show what we used for examples and how it worked for us, but not make it so resource intensive that we would be almost handing off a burden when we left for the medical center to continue. So it was very successful. We were originally there for 14 days. We agreed to stay for 21 because we were just really getting up and running with some large numbers, and then stepped back after 21, and El Centro Medical Center has continued the process.
Great. And a question really to many of you, whoever wants to jump in, we're talking about building in speed and efficiency. And I think those of us that are doing this all really feel like tying the moment of testing to the moment of infusion is critical. Maybe Hani, I'll ask you, just from looking at this as a systems perspective, how did you look at linking testing with monoclonals?
I think Dr. Mani spoke to the artificial intelligence, and that was where we thought if we start at the entry point of testing, at the very first registration point, and we already screen at that point, we're putting in motion the potential to screen whether this patient is COVID positive, but at the same time eligible for the monoclonal. And I think starting at the very first possible entry point was key to success for us.
So sometimes that might involve working outside of your own institution and breaking down a silo. Justin, a question to you. Did you have experience working with organizations outside of yours, and how did that go?
With long-term care facilities, of course, the facilities that we did go into, it's not the easiest thing, unfortunately. And I would love to say that we received this drug and everything was perfect and we went out and gave it to everyone who wanted it. And that wasn't the case, unfortunately. We really had to market ourselves just as we would market our pharmacy, unfortunately, for a drug, which I just assumed people would want as they came out. And so we did reach out to several sites, of course, not just the facilities, but also hospitals, anyone who's taking those patients on, saying, listen, if you can prevent these patients from entering the hospital, we can do this in this facility. We can do it in where they are. And so we've really had to reach out and market to, again, market a drug, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It's just someone, something somebody wants or something somebody needs. But we've really built pretty good relationships with a lot of health systems in the state and provided the information that it is available. These are things that we can give to you. And so it's not just our regular service area. It's a large part of the state, really anywhere in state, and even Missouri and potentially Oklahoma right now we're looking at to be able to spread out and build some more relationships with people, be able to get these out there, because I know they're needed. But it's, we've met a lot of people. We've talked to a lot of people to be able to proceed with this.
Yeah, great. We only have a couple of minutes left, but I want to get a couple of practical questions in there. There's a couple that coming into the Q&A from Lisa Carlin and Elaine Soriano about the rapid infusion time, cutting the bamlanivimab down to 15 or 20 minutes. Does anybody have experience with that and would want to share it? I wonder, Mary, are you using that in a dialysis session, or does the volume change things?
Yeah, so being able to give it in 50 mLs of fluid versus 250 is helpful where fluid removal is a challenge. And in the Blaze trial, 7 grams were given, so we're already shrinking the amount we're giving. So we think that's really been helpful in terms of efficiency and have no concerns about doing that.
And maybe to John or Gina, with the combination products, for right now, only the smaller volume is really authorized for the bamlanivimab. But is there a thought going forward that this will also be allowed for the combination products? Gina or John?
There's work on it. That would be the answer. I mean, I can say that, and I don't speak officially for FDA, of course, but we work with them all the time. And there is certainly appreciation that the ability to infuse in a smaller volume is extremely helpful.
Anything to add, Gina?
I would add to that too, though, the combination product, there's a lot of focus that people might not be aware of the new packaging they're going to do with the combination product, which has been a concern for everyone, right? They feel that there's perhaps more risk when you're using multiple vials and you're using 2 different products, and that is on the way of this combined packaging, which I think is going to be very helpful. We did use those products, not mixed by a pharmacist, mixed by a nurse. We did a 2-person check when we were in our tent, our infusion site, and we developed a system of kind of separating them on a table to be able to bring our be more efficient, or the most efficient we could be with mixing them. And it was not as much as the labor intensive act that we thought it would be.
I think I've got time for 1 or 2 more questions. This to you, Brandon, a question about pre-medication and adverse reactions. Have you been pre-medicating with any antihistamines or anti-inflammatories?
We're not.
You just muted yourself there, Brandon. There you go.
Yeah, we're not pre-medicating. We found that nausea is actually much more common than hypersensitivity type reaction. So for patients who are prone to that, we do have in our order set Zofran, and have used Zofran a lot more frequently than antihistamines, actually.
Okay, and then in terms of reactions, have you had any serious allergic reactions that you've had?
No, the only 2 serious reactions that we've had were both vasovagal during the infusion. We had 2 patients who had a syncopal or pre-syncopal episode. All of the hypersensitivity type reactions we've had have been mild.
Great. I'm just going to conclude with a comment rather than a question. One of the reasons I appreciate these sessions so much is they generate great ideas. There was a comment about outcomes and looking at outcomes of long COVID, which we've been so busy, we haven't really looked at that, but I think that's really relevant for us to start compiling that, and it would be nice to show the benefits. So we are 2 minutes before the hour, so I'm sad to say I have to turn it back over to Tiffany to conclude our session, but we've got great ideas for future sessions, and thank you so much to all the panelists and for the lurkers for jumping in at the last minute too. It's been a great session. So over to you, Tiffany.
Yeah, thank you very much, Christian. I'll just echo, I think this has been a fantastic session with both practical and inspiring insight from our presenters and panelists. So thank you again for sharing your time and expertise with us today. And of course, thank you to all the participants who spent the last hour with us and raised such intriguing questions. Before we close, I'll highlight our next 2 sessions. On February 17th, we're preparing for a theme on regional approaches to monoclonal administration. And one presenter will be from the state of Utah, who has assembled monoclonal strike teams that are deployed throughout the state to support long-term care facilities. And then on February 24th, we'll be discussing equity and underserved populations. So keep an eye out for these announcements as they become available, which will list the full complement of presenters and panelists. And with that, I'll hand things back to Bruce.
Thanks, Tiffany, and special thanks to Karina and Brandon for sharing their experiences from Utah and New York City or New York. And there were over 50 questions. 28 of them have already been answered in the Q&A. We weren't able to get to all of them, but we will incorporate what we're learning from those as we plan for future sessions, try and answer them in the upcoming sessions. So thanks again to everyone for taking time out and sharing your experience and your questions, and look forward to seeing everyone next week. Take care. Thanks, Christian.